Hey guys, we are back updating the power rankings for Big Brother 25 during week 1, and as expected, quite a bit has changed from the last time I talked about these people. We obviously have been seeing how these players have been playing, and we also have a new player that I was not aware about at the time of recording last week's video, but we'll get to all that in a moment. Now, before we do so, I should say that I'm recording this on Tuesday, August 8th. And for people new with the channel, I do talk quite a bit about live feed spoilers, including the veto results. So if you don't want to be spoiled on that, be sure to click out this video. But with all that said, we have 17 players to rank, and let's not waste any more time. Let's get right into the video. So starting off at number 17, the person I believe is the least likely to win Big Brother 25 is the person I believe is the most likely to be evicted on Thursday night, and here we have Kirsten. And Kirsten is someone that definitely has something in her. Like, people talk about that she's pretty good socially and that people seem to like her. However, she really does it to herself, where she just really plays too hard on that first night, where she is the one to initiate the Phalanx 5, but then proceeds to rat that alliance out to a lot of the other housemates. She also, tells people that groups are forming, but is pretty vague about it. She really comes off as pretty sketchy to a lot of these people and comes off as someone that's really overplaying, to the point where after Riley wins HOH, despite Riley initially being part of this Phalanx 5 that Kirsten initiated, Riley is the one to leave her up on the block when Corey was a very clear consensus target at the beginning of the week. And from that point on, Kirsten's a consensus target, where after Hisam wins the veto, he decides not to use it, and Kirsten's pretty much screwed at this point. And really, she's been a consensus target now for the last few days, where a lot of the talks have already moved on to next week and aren't even including her. So I feel like Kirsten is someone that was a pretty clear consensus first boot here, and someone that largely did it to themselves. Now, I won't say that she's the worst player in the world, and I feel like there's definitely some potential within her. I feel like she really misplayed her hand during this first few days that caused a lot of people to not really trust her, and because of that, she's probably going to be voted out on Thursday night, and for that reason, she is here at number 17. Now we're moving on to number 16, and I feel like these next couple of people are all people that played relatively poorly this week, and are all people that have at least some shot of being targeted next week, and it really was just a matter of ordering them. But number 16, and I actually wasn't expecting this person to be second from the bottom, but after thinking about it and after seeing them over the last day, I really do worry for them. And here we have Cameron. And I feel like Cameron has largely dropped the ball over the last day or so. Now, I will say that early on in the week, he wasn't playing that well, where a lot of people were kind of turned off by him. Izzy even says that he gave off serial killer vibes, which says something. Now, he did recover a bit to where he was eventually included in Family Style and was even like the second core within that. He really ingratiated himself with the likes of Riley, Blue, and Jag. He also builds a very solid bond with Red. So he does build some relationships over the course of the week, but I feel like these last few days have really highlighted Cameron's overconfidence, where first you have his whole speech in front of Family Style where he says that he's going to gather intel from the other side and that they don't have to worry, they don't have to play, which is something. He walks around the house really confident and really cocky, and people have been noticing that, which is also not great. And he's also rubbed certain people the wrong way, people like a Hisam, to the point where they would target them. And it's gotten to the point now where Cameron's now a very likely target from the professor side if any of them win HOH. Now, yes, you have people like Izzy feeling like they've been able to flip over Cameron to their side, but I still feel like they're going to come to see Cameron as a pretty unreliable ally, to where they might end up targeting them anyway. So I feel like that's pretty bad as well. You also have his conversations with Riley, which have not spoken well to his social skills, if you ask me. I feel like there's just so many potential opportunities for Cameron to be targeted next week that made me put him pretty low on the list. But even aside from that, it's just the behavior that he's displayed just makes it so that even if Family Style were to win HOH, I could see them being fine letting Cameron go under certain cases, even more so than the next person we'll be talking about. So I feel like it's for all those reasons that I did decide to drop Cameron all the way down here. Although he still has some pros to his game, like he does still have some relationships, he's still pretty close to Red. I also think he has some potential to win HOH himself, which admittedly may not be that good for his game. He could potentially blow it up further, but I feel like the gameplay that Cameron has displayed has made me feel like he's going to be a potential target next week, and for that reason, he is here number 16. Now we're moving on to number 15, and we have someone that for the longest time I thought was going to be towards the bottom, but again, after Cameron's behavior the last few days, I feel like I had them one spot higher, and here we have Luke. And I feel like Luke's been playing way too passively in these early days and hasn't really been able to build a lot of relationships to the point where he was even considered a backdoor target this week had the veto been used. But through Hisam winning it and not using it, he's sort of been spared there. And really, with the way that the house has been set up, he's sort of been benefited from it to where we see like him being recruited by the professor side into their group. But even then, like he's not really that much of a figure within there. And even in the last day, where he is finally starting to realize he's at the bottom, a lot of his conversations to try to ingratiate himself within a lot of these big groups just have been pretty awkward. And I feel like they've demonstrated that he's just not that good of a social player. And even moving forward, I could still see him being a backdoor target in the next week or so. So I feel like Luke is someone that has largely been like on the outs for a lot of it, where even though he was part of the initial Phalanx 5, he very quickly took a back seat to the point where he could have been a target this week. And I still feel like there are still some cases where he could be a target next week. And moving forward, while he could be in an alliance, I feel like he's not really well positioned within either alliance if he were to become a member of them. So I feel like for now, I can't really have Luke any higher than here. But I feel like with other people being more likely to be directly targeted next week, I did decide to have him one spot higher at number 15. Now moving on to number 14, and this was a bit of a misread on my end, but here we are. But here we have the current HOH, and here we have Riley. And I feel like Riley's game early on has been largely messy as well, and I feel like she hasn't displayed much good gameplay if you ask me. Where early on she does win HOH, which is pretty good. She also like talks to a decent amount of people, but she comes off as someone that just says yes to anyone that talks to her. She seems to really like the attention to the point where she almost built this alliance with Jared, where Jared would have suggested like a brigade style approach. And through that, like it would have left out a lot of her close allies in Blue and Jag. And it literally took Jag and Blue mentioning the fact that they should build a separate Onion alliance that excluded the likes of Cirie and Felicia that allowed Riley to get in on that. So I feel like through that, Riley's not a very proactive player. And even beyond that, like you have her just blabbing information left and right. Like she just decides to tell people for whatever reason that she's very close allies with Jag. And while her and Jag were very close early on, Jag's picked up on the fact that she's been way too open. And through that, he's gravitated a bit more towards Blue as of recently. So I feel like that's not particularly great. I feel like the way she constructed the alliance isn't great either, to where a lot of the rest of the house picked up on it. You have the way that they included Jared last that allowed Jared to then leak the alliance to the other side. And even moving forward, she is going to be a potential target next week, where again, if any of the professors win HOH, she is very much in the talks of being targeted next week, where it could be her and Jack on the block together. Now, the one pro I will give to Riley is that her side does seem a bit better equipped in comps to where it's possible they could just get away from it. But even so, like I feel like the alliance is just not very stable, where you even have Corey and Jared potentially flipping. You have Cameron, who is a bit of a loose end there. I feel like there are a number of ways that her alliance could potentially crumble. And if it were to crumble, I feel like she could be a very easy target because of that. So I don't feel like she's played her HOH particularly well, and I feel like she's not in a prime spot moving forward. But again, there are still some outs for her, and I feel like she hasn't played as actively bad as some of the other people we've already talked about. So I feel like it's for that reason that I have her here number 14. Now moving on to number 13, and again, we have another person that could potentially be targeted next week, depending on how the HOH goes. But here we have Hisam. And I feel like Hisam has been a bit of a letdown for me as well, where I feel like he, sort of similar to Luke, isn't the best socially. I feel like he's been kind of awkward. And plus, he has some weird, like, logic in the game where he built this rivalry with Corey early on, and he just admits that he doesn't like Corey. And despite Corey trying a number of times to mend things over, Hisam's just not really listening to him, and he's just pretty much blindly against Corey, despite the fact that Corey is very clearly a number for his alliance, which isn't great there. he's also been seen as a pretty sketchy figure by the other side, to where he's sort of seen as the figurehead of the opposition to Family Style, to where if anyone from Family Style wins HOH, he's going to be a pretty likely target from that side, which isn't great there. And I feel like in general, like he hasn't like built the best relationships in the game. And I feel like he's not the best strategist there either. But to his credit, he is probably the best physical competitor from that side of the house, where he came pretty close to winning the initial comp, and then he wins the veto, which is pretty good there. So I think there's definitely some ways for Hisam to maneuver through the game, particularly with him providing challenge strength to his alliance. But I feel like his management of certain relationships hasn't been great. And with him being such an easy potential target from the other side, I feel like I can't really have him any higher than here. But again, I feel like it's enough to have him here number 13. Now we're moving on to number 12, and we have someone pretty similar to Hisam in a lot of ways, but here we have Izzy. And I feel like Izzy's sort of in a similar spot to Hisam at the moment, where she is seen by the other side as a pretty integral figure in rallying a lot of the players against the Family Style, to where I could see her being a potential target as well if Family Style were to win HOH, which isn't good there. She's also been a bit more chaotic as a player, where she just runs her mouth nonstop. Like you have like the whole thing after the veto where it seemed like Cirie could have been backdoor. Like she was the main instigator of this idea, even though there really wasn't much evidence for it outside of Riley seemingly going slow in the comp. And she just runs around the entire house, like telling people all about this. And while it doesn't come to be, I think it highlights that Izzy is just someone that will just run her mouth and someone that is just a very chaotic player. And it's gotten to the point where even her close allies in Cirie has sort of like questioned her to a degree. They feel like they're not the most reliable ally in the world. But really, the main reason I have her this low is because her potential target for next week. I feel like she's not going to be the safest person under certain HOH reigns. And I feel like if Hisam were to win the veto, or if the other side were worried about Hisam winning the veto, like they could just put up Izzy to begin with. So I think that was enough of a concern to have her this low. Plus, based on what she's demonstrated so far, I don't really feel good about her long-term prospects either. But considering that other people are more likely to be immediate targets, I do have her here at number 12. Now moving on to number 11, and I feel like I largely expected this person to do how they're doing. And even though this person's not as likely to be targeted in the near future, I feel like their overall path forward isn't great. But here we have Red. And to be fair, I think Red has been playing better over the course of the week. Where early on he did struggle a bit. He kind of got in trouble for saying that he doesn't want to talk game too early, which in turn stirred some distrust from other people, thinking that he's talking game with other people. And in turn, like people just aren't talking game with him. So I feel like he kind of made a mistake there. But I feel like in more recent days, he has sort of turned around. He's built some good relationships. He's bonded a lot with Cameron, even though I feel like Cameron's going to be in a bad spot. But he's bonded more importantly with Cirie, Felicia, and Izzy, to where he's now a pretty clear number within there. Although, to be fair, I don't think he's even that well positioned within them. And I think the other thing to credit Red is that I don't think he's going to be in danger anytime soon. I don't really see anyone prioritizing taking out Red, even in the case of Cameron being targeted. But my issue is that, one, he's not one of the more active players. Like, he's definitely aware of game things, to where he even clocked the entire Family Style to Riley, which is pretty funny there. And he definitely can pick it up as the game goes along. I feel like through what he's demonstrated this week, I feel like he's probably not the best position in the world, but he's still relatively safe, which is why he's at least this high on the list. But I feel like he definitely has some room to improve. But for now, I do have to leave him here, number 11. Now moving on to number 10, and I kind of hate to put this person this low, and I think they have plenty of potential to move up, but I feel like for the time being, they're kind of in a bad spot. But here we have my winner pick, and here we have Jag. And to be fair, I don't think Jag himself has been playing that poorly. I feel like early on he's been pretty level-headed. He's been able to build decent relationships. He comes off as pretty likable. And I feel like he's been like a good force for the likes of Riley during her HOH, where it was him and Blue that suggested building the Family Style Alliance versus what Jared suggested, which obviously puts him in a better position within that power structure The problem is that everyone within that power structure isn't exactly the best player in the world. Where I think the prime example of this is Riley, who has been pretty much willing to tell anyone and everyone that Jag is her number one ally, which has put a target on his back, like it or not. You obviously have other people within Family Style that have either recognized that they're at the bottom, people like Corey and Jared, or people that are just not good allies. Like you have Blue, who does seem to be more level headed than Riley, but even then hasn't been perfect, and it's definitely sown some distrust outside of the alliance. You also have Cameron, where I already talked about Cameron, and I feel like despite his efforts to build this onion alliance that he is very well positioned within, should it remain true, the issue is that the other side has already recognized it. The alliance itself has been way too transparent about the alliance to the point where an opposition could form, and even members within it aren't likely to stick with it long term. And moving forward, you have people talking about putting Riley and Jag together on the block next week, or possibly even Jag and Blue, although that's less likely. And I feel like through that, Jag could be in some danger next week. Now, granted, I don't think he's in as much danger as other people, and I think even if it was him and Riley on the block, I think Riley's more likely to go home over him. But I could also see people saying that Jag's a bigger threat and a better player to where he could end up being taken out that way. And to be fair, Jag himself has not been perfect. I don't feel like he's managed all of his relationships perfectly to where he could keep this Onion Alliance together. But it's the real potential of him being sniped out within the next week, despite him not being the worst player within his alliance, that makes him a bit lower on this list. And even beyond that, he's definitely primed to lose some of his numbers should the other side win HOH, even if it's not himself. But I still feel like Jag has quite a bit of potential to move up on this list, as I feel like I have more faith in Jag to maneuver out of bad situations than even the next person we'll be talking about. But I feel like given the short-term risk of him being sniped out of the game due to other people's mistakes, I can't really have him any higher on this list, but I still have him here number 10. Now we're moving on to number 9, and we have someone that I mentioned not too long ago, but here we have Blue. And the reason I had Blue at the bottom of my preseason ranking is simply because we had the least amount of information on her. Well, now we do have some information, and I think Blue is, again, not the worst player in the world. She has built some solid relationships. She's built a bond with Izzy due to her being LGBT. She's also in the core of Family Style, which could save her, assuming that Family Style holds the power. However, even then, I feel like there's a lot of potential for that core to be targeted if the other side wins the HOH. However, the reason I have Blue above the others is that I feel like she's probably the safest out of those three. Or I feel like Riley's by far the biggest target. If not her, I could see Jag just being taken out as a bigger threat, where I feel like Blue could definitely slip under the radar. And I think another thing contributing to that is her relationship with Jared, where she's built a pretty good relationship there. There's even a bit of flirting going on, to where I could see a world where Jared could include her on her plans if they move forward in the game together. So it's not as if Blue's in the worst spot in the world, but I still fear that there's a lot of potential for her side to disintegrate, for her power structure to disintegrate, and for her to kind of be on the outs at that point. But still, I feel like compared to the other three, I feel like she's the most likely to be safe next week, which is why she's here at number 9. Now moving on to number 8, and I did debate whether this person is too high, as I feel like their game is a bit similar to Red's. However, I feel like they've made less mistakes up to this point, but to be fair, I feel like they've been also a bit more passive. But here we have Bowie, and Bowie is someone that I think is pretty well liked. I think people seem to like her. However, I also think no one really takes her seriously, where she hasn't really been talking too much game with a lot of people, especially the younger players, as I feel like she's largely attached herself to the likes of Cirie and Felicia and a lot of the people on the professor side. Now, there has been talk in recent days about her being flipped over to the Jag side, where I know Jag was courting her. And I know in recent days there's been some concern about Cameron liking Bowie as well, which could be a concern there. But I feel like Bowie is largely safe simply because she's a non-threat. I mean, what threat is Bowie to really anyone's game? But I feel like that could also pose a problem for her later on in the game, where I could see her struggling to win a jury vote. That, and also, I mean, she's probably not going to win too many cons, but we'll have to see. I feel like I could put Bowie lower over time, but I feel like given how safe she is, and given how less in danger her own allies are, I feel like I did decide to put her a little bit higher, and here she is at number 8. Now moving on to number 7, and we have someone that I kind of see similar to Bowie overall, but I feel like they have a bit more upside. And here we have Felicia, who is currently on the block, and that was definitely a factor for me in terms of where to place her. However, considering that she's pretty much safe for the week, where yes, there was some talk about the veto being used, but really I feel like Felicia was pretty safe regardless, and she's pretty much safe this week. But even moving forward, I feel like she's definitely built a very solid bond with Cirie. She's a pretty integral number within the professor side. But even then, I feel like she's largely setting herself up to be a second in command to Cirie, which I don't particularly love. I also don't feel like she's branched out enough from the people outside the professors, where I don't really see her like bonding a lot with the younger players, which can be a concern later on in the game, though I don't really see them targeting Felicia early on. And I feel like with her not really being poised to win a lot of comps, I feel like that could definitely pose a problem for her later on. You also have the fact that she was initially supposed to be taken off the block by Riley until Corey made a pitch to her that wasn't even that good, but it was enough to convince Riley to leave Felicia on the block as a pawn, which I do think is a bit of a knock there. Kind of makes me a bit worried about Felicia's proactiveness within the game, but it's not as if she's completely passive either. So I think Felicia is someone that's definitely set up for a decent run in terms of longevity, but I feel like there are still some knocks within her week, such as her not convincing Riley to take her off the block, and even moving forward, like her lack of relationships with people outside the professor's side could really come back to bite her by the end of it. I feel like she needs to branch out from just working with Cirie, but I feel like for the time being, she's doing fine enough, which is why she's here at number 7. Now moving on to number 6, and I also debated this person as well, as this has probably been one of the most quiet people on the feeds for this first week, but I still feel like this person definitely has longevity within them, and I feel like they definitely have more of a path forward, even if their current spot isn't the greatest. But here we have America, and I feel like America has been pretty quiet up to this point, where a lot of her content has been her aligning with family style and not even being a solid number within that. But even so, she's pretty well liked. She's someone that isn't going to be targeted anytime soon, unless it's like purely to take a shot at the other side without taking out a big threat, which even then, I don't think America's super likely to go home in that case. But I feel like America's hasn't really done anything to really knock against her game, but I do wish she would be a bit more active in the game. Although even then, she has been building more relationships as of late, to where I could see her navigating the game if family style were to implode, which, to be fair, is a real possibility. But I feel like for the time being, with her lack of presence, I can't really have her any higher on this list, though I could see this changing quite a bit. But for now, I'll have her here at number 6. Now we're moving on to number 5, and we have someone pretty similar to America in that they've been pretty quiet up to this point, but I feel like what they've been doing in recent days has been better. But here we have Mimi. And admittedly, Mimi got out to a rough start where she was aligning herself a bit too closely with Kirsten, although once Kirsten became targeted and became a sinking ship, she knew to jump off. And since then, she has been building good relationships. She's built a pretty good relationship with America, built a pretty good relationship with Corey, and even beyond that, has been included in a lot of the Professor side's alliances, to where as of more recently, she's been included in the Brown Sugar Babes with Cirie, Jared, and Felicia. I feel like Mimi has been doing more in recent days and has been setting herself up pretty well, to where she has two pretty solid allies that I feel like will be pretty close to her moving forward. She's not really being talked about as a threat by anyone, so I feel like she will definitely be in the game for a bit, and I feel like she has potential to move up moving forward. Now, admittedly, she's not really driving the action and she's just kind of flying under the radar, but I feel like compared to a lot of the other players, I feel like she's setting herself up pretty well. So I feel like for that reason, I do have her a bit higher on the list, but considering she's still pretty quiet on the feeds, I can't really have her any higher than number 5. Now we're moving on to number 4, and this is another debatable pick, and I could definitely see this person moving down, but I feel like so far they seem to be in an alright spot. But here we have Matt. And Matt could definitely be seen as someone that could be lower on the list simply because he hasn't really been talking too much game. Now, some of that comes from his hearing impairment, where he hasn't really been included in as much game talks, but people do like him a lot, and I feel like that has led to him being included in Family Style. And Matt even recognizes that he's not that well positioned within Family Style, so he could potentially flip. He admits that he's just nodding along with Family Style for now. That way, if they do end up steamrolling the game, he could be a number for them. While if they fall apart, he could very easily jump ship. He's been building good relationships, like he's talked a lot with Hisam, with Jared, to the point where he's one of the least likely people to be targeted within that group. But at the same time, he still has quite a bit of comp ability, where I could easily see him just skating his way through a lot of the game until he can just win some comps to gain some power. So I think right now he's another case of someone that's probably not in the best position in the world, but is still someone that could definitely benefit a lot as the game becomes more dynamic. So I think that's a big factor there. I will say the one main knock is the perception that he and Riley are in a showmance, which isn't really that true, but is still something that's percolating out there. And I could see that getting him into trouble, but even then, like people like Jared said that he wouldn't want to have Matt on the block over someone like a Jag if they were to target Riley. So I think Matt is still in a good spot for now. However, I do want to see more from him gameplay wise. But I feel like compared to a lot of the other people, he's probably in a better spot than those people, which is why he's here at number 4. Now moving on to number 3, and this was probably the most difficult placement for me, as I could very easily see a debate for this person being lower on the list, and I feel like in the long term, I don't really see this person being consistently this high on this power ranking. But I feel like based on the game that they played this week, I feel like there was enough upside that I decided to put Corey here at number 3. Now, there's plenty of holes in Corey's game so far, plenty of things that I could see going against him in the future, but I think there are still some things you can point to, like the fact that he was obviously sucked into the nether region after the initial comp, and after he came back, he was seen initially as the consensus target. It seemed like people were writing him off during that first night, and they weren't really giving him much of a chance. But through a combination of Kirsten overplaying and through him talking with Riley, he's able to get off the block and make Kirsten the target instead. Now, you can definitely debate how much credit he should get for this, considering that Riley was pretty much receptive to anyone that would talk to her, and even Corey's pitch there wasn't that great, but you still have to give him some credit for being able to come in late and be able to at least get Riley to take him off the block. And I feel like since then, he's been put in a good spot where he's first included in Family Style, and then later on, like he recognizes that he's not in the best spot there. He recognizes that it's not the inner layer of a Onion Alliance that he's in that leads to him going over to the other side and potentially flipping. So I feel like through that, Corey is in an interesting spot where he could play the middle for a while alongside Jared. Now, with that, there's also his relationships with Mimi that can definitely be a factor for him as well. So he's definitely been one of the more active players early on, and he definitely has plenty of pros going for him. Now, on the flip side, there are definitely some knocks. Like, there are definitely people that just don't really like him. I mean, Hisam particularly doesn't really like him. And to be fair, I think a lot of that is just Hisam being stubborn and not really allowing himself to see the good in Corey. Although even then, like Corey himself is probably not the best social player in the world either, so that's a factor. Izzy is another person that isn't super high on him. And I could definitely see a world where Corey could eventually fall out of his good position and end up in a bad one. But I still feel like based on what we saw from this individual week, I feel like Corey's definitely showing some potential as a player, and I could definitely see him maneuvering through the game, being one of the more dynamic players as well. And I feel like with the upsides that he demonstrated during this week, I did decide to put him this high. I decided to give him the benefit of the doubt, though I could also see the downsides to his game and the potential for him to go down in the future. But for now, I do have him here at number 3. Now we're moving on to number 2, and we have the player that was added to the season at the last minute. And here we have Cirie Fields from Survivor. And what a world we are in where Cirie is playing Survivor. And admittedly, I was pretty low on this coming into it. For even though I acknowledge that Cirie is a great player, I feel like there was just no way that this cast was going to let her do well, considering not only her Survivor career, but also the fact that she was on the Traders this past year, where she pretty much steamrolled that season. And I felt like that would have been on the top of people's minds. And especially with Jared also being there, I feel like that would just put an instant target on their back. Except it seems like no one knows that Jared is Cirie's son except for Izzy, which I find pretty funny. Like even Corey, who you would think would be this big super fan Big Brother and Survivor and knows everything, he doesn't know that Corey and Jared are related. So I feel like that lack of knowledge is something that definitely benefits Cirie. And I feel like through Cirie just being a very gifted social player, she's been able to build very solid relationships with a lot of people in the house. She's built relationships with a lot of people on her side, the likes of Felicia, with Izzy, with Jared. Obviously, you have Bowie as well. Even people on the other side, you have Riley, where even at the prospect of like Cirie being backdoor, like it just was never really an option for anyone. And I feel like Cirie has really shown once again how good of a social player she is in terms of building relationships. And she's also a pretty good strategist as well, where she was able to figure out through Jared that there was this other alliance forming. And through that, she was able to at least start to put together an opposition alliance. Now, again, like it seems more stable than the family style alliance, but even then, it's not perfect. Like you have the likes of Izzy just running around. And I feel like that could definitely make things complicated for Cirie in the future. But I feel like for now, at least, Cirie's actually in a very solid spot. No one's really coming after her. She's putting her pieces together. And I feel like she's someone that can definitely be set up for a pretty deep run. And especially with Jared there as well, who is also in a very solid position. However, I still worry that by the end game, like she will either be too big of a threat herself or she'll just be unable to win the comps that she needs to get safety in order to get to the very end of the game. So I feel like those natural concerns that you would have with Cirie on any given season of Survivor could also apply to Big Brother as well. But I'm still pretty elated to see Cirie on Big Brother and to see you're actually like making some inroads. So I think it'll be very fun to watch Cirie across the season. And for this week's power ranking, I did decide to put her here at number 2. And now at number 1, the person I believe is the most likely to win Big Brother 25 right now is Jared. And I think Jared is actually in a very solid position right now. Now, right now, it does seem like there could be some people catching on to him being this mole between the two alliances. But really, if we were looking at the game that he's played across his first week, he's definitely well positioned. Now, I will say that he's been a bit sloppy as a player. Like, he's definitely been not the greatest at talking to people. He is someone that doesn't really give a lot of information. He's someone that can be a bit loose at points. And obviously he's not in the core of like family style, for instance, where he was literally the last person to be brought into that alliance. But he was able to use that and go right back to Cirie, leak the entire alliance, be able to leak every single person that was in it, that allowed that other side to start mobilizing. Now, granted, like obviously people are starting to pick up on that, but I still feel like Jared's going to be in a very solid position where he has a number of very solid relationships, not just within like the professor side, but where obviously he has his mom, he has Felicia, he has Izzy even. But then on the other side, like he has likes of Blue and Corey. Like he has like so many like connections in the house that I feel like he'll be able to leverage to his benefit. And unlike Cirie, I feel like Jared's also someone that is better suited in endgame comps than her. Now, granted, I don't think he should be winning many comps at this point, as he should be trying his best to maintain his middle position. But I feel like for now, he's in a solid enough position. He's probably in the best position in the house. And I feel like, unlike a Corey, he probably has less downsides, so he still has some. But I feel like, given the way the house is laid out right now, Jared's in the best spot. And I feel like for that, he is here at number 1. And there we go. That will do it for this week's video. If you like this content, be sure to like and subscribe. Really helps out with the channel. Now I'll be back again next week to update the Power Rankings again, so stay tuned for that. I'm planning to live stream the live show on Thursday night so we can talk more about what's been going on there. I also have a Patreon, and I want to thank my patrons for supporting this content, and you can do so too by clicking the link in the description. And if you haven't already, be sure to join my Discord server, which you can do by clicking the link in the description. There's a lot of fun stuff coming your way, but for now, that's the video. See ya.